A couple days ago, I found this fake tree stump on a shelf for 30 bucks. And I couldn't help but think, could I get this turned into a hidden water fountain, or am I gonna ruin this perfectly fine plant stand? This corner of the yard has always been one of my favorite places. Ever since I built the fountain out here, it's been one of those spots where I could just sit back and enjoy the birds. But lately, I've been wanting something that felt a little more natural, something that blended into the garden instead of standing out. That's where this old tree stump came in. Before I could start building, I wanted to give the flower bed a fresh start. Over time, the grass had started creeping in, weeds were taking over, and the edges had lost their shape. I just knew if this stump was going to become the centerpiece, that the rest of the garden deserved a little attention too. One of my favorite things about working with nature is all the little surprises you'll find along the way. Finding a healthy earthworm like this is always a good sign. Getting these hands dirty. With the garden bed finally ready, it was time to see if this idea could actually come together. The goal was to keep everything hidden beneath the stump, leaving nothing visible except the water. That meant every piece had to fit together just right. A masonry drill bit would create a path through the center of the stump, while a small fountain nozzle would shape the stream of water once everything was assembled. Then all that was left was connecting it with half-inch tubing and hoping I'd measured everything correctly. And since the top of the bucket isn't perfectly flat, I brought a couple of saucers to create a level surface for the stump to sit on. Now all that was left was putting it all together. This was probably the most important part of the entire project. If I couldn't get a clean hole through the center of the stump, none of the rest of it was going to work. The fiber clay inside kept clogging the drill bit, so I had to stop every few seconds and clear everything back out. Adding a little water helped soften the clay just enough to keep things moving. After a little patience, I finally made it through. And thankfully, the nozzle fit perfectly. With the hole drilled through the center, there was still one more thing I needed to do. I still needed to open up the bottom of the stump just to make room for the tubing and the fountain fitting. Taking a little extra time here would hopefully make the final assembly go a lot smoother. Until I came up with one thing. Unfortunately, I ran into a slight problem. It's going to be extremely hard to feed this tube through this hole and make it come out of this hole. So I'm gonna have to try to find a solution to do so. If you guys have any better solutions that you want to let me know, make sure you drop them down below in the comments, because this is gonna be kind of difficult. Funnel my rebar through the tube, turn the stump over, funnel it through the bottom, and try to find the top. I'm gonna keep spinning and see if it'll maybe go in there. There we go. Okay. So we got the tubing through. Finally, I was able to get the tubing through and the rebar out. I just had to take this tip off and funnel this rebar out of the tube, and then I continued and I put this tip back on with the tubing through. Now it's time to dig a hole. With all the planning out of the way, it was finally time to bring everything together. The first step was removing the old basin so I could make room for the new hidden reservoir. Since this spot had already been home to a fountain once before, I already had a hole to work with, which saved me quite a bit of digging. With the stump finally finished, it was time to get the hidden reservoir ready. This 5-gallon bucket is what will hold all of the water, so I needed to make a few modifications before it could go into the ground. The first hole, right in the center, would allow the tubing to pass straight through the lid and up into the stump. And then, I drilled several smaller holes around it so any water flowing back down through the fountain could easily drain back into the bucket. It doesn't look like much now, but these little details are what keep the fountain working the way it's supposed to. Taking a few extra minutes here would hopefully save me from having to dig everything back up later. Now that I have holes in the top of this bucket, it is time to dig the hole and put this bucket in there and kind of fill the edges in the existing hole with dirt. With the bucket finally sitting where I wanted it, the next step was locking everything into place. To do that, I brought in a few bags of garden soil to fill up the space around the bucket. I wanted to make sure there weren't any large gaps that could cause it to shift over time. Once the bags were open, I started working with the soil in around the sides, packing it in a little at a time until the bucket was nice and secure. As the soil reached the top of the bucket, everything finally started coming together. To finish it off, I spread a fresh layer of mulch across the top. Not only would it help hide the bucket, but it would also help blend everything back into the rest of the flower bed. With the reservoir hidden, there was one final detail to take care of before setting the stump in place. I decided to use a thick contractor trash bag as a liner. The idea was simple. It would catch any water running off the stump and direct it back into the reservoir instead of letting it disappear into the mulch. After cutting it to size, making an opening for the tubing, it would be hidden beneath the stump, completely out of sight, but still doing an important job behind the scenes. Before I could seal everything up, the reservoir needed one final ingredient: water. Since the bucket would be hidden beneath the fountain, now was the easiest time to fill it up and make sure the pump had plenty of water to work with. With the reservoir full, it was finally time to install the lid and finish preparing the foundation for the stump. Before everything could be sealed up, I wanted to make sure the pump had plenty of water to work with. Since it would be hidden beneath the fountain, now was the easiest time to get everything set up. Once the pump was in place, I was finally ready to cover everything up and move on to the final assembly. The stump is just a little bit bigger than the bucket lid, which left a small gap around the edge. So I made this simple liner to catch any water that splashes outside the fountain and guide it right back into the reservoir instead of soaking into the mulch. It's one of those little details that you'll never notice once it's finished, but it makes a big difference. With the hidden liner in place, it was finally time to bring everything together. I started by laying down a layer of river pebbles to support the stump while still allowing the water to drain back into the reservoir below. Then, after a few weeks of picturing this project in my head, it was finally time. I pulled the tubing tight, carefully lowered the stump into place, and took one last look before turning it on. To help everything blend into the garden, I surrounded the base with river pebbles. Not only did they hide the edges, but they also gave the fountain a much more natural look. Before attaching the nozzle, I made one final trim. Cutting the tubing as straight as possible helps keep the water flowing evenly instead of pushing it off to one side. Then, it was just a matter of pressing the nozzle into place and turning the fountain until everything looked just right. Moment of truth. For a second, I thought all that work had been for nothing. Everything looked right, but the water wasn't making it to the top. That's when I noticed something wasn't quite right. I'm not getting any water coming out of this. Hold on, we're bubbling a little bit. Maybe we just gotta give it a minute. All right, so our problem is right under here, our tube is kinked up and we're gonna try to unkink it. And there we go. What your goal is, you want to make sure that none of the water down here is leaking out, or else all the water that's in here is going to seep out off the edge. So that's what we have this trash bag for, just in case the water was to splash out here, like right in these places, that it would run right back into the water basin. With the fountain finally working, all that was left was bringing everything together. I wanted this little corner of the yard to feel natural, like the fountain had always been here. So I decided to finish it off with a few white wave petunias. My hope is that as they grow, they'll soften the edges of the fountain and blend everything together. With everything in place, I trimmed away the excess liner to clean up the edges and help everything blend together a little better. With everything finally in place, all that was left was washing away the dust from the build. After a full afternoon of digging, drilling, and landscaping, seeing everything finally come together made every bit of work worth it. It's amazing how a little bit of water can completely bring a project to life. I started this project because I wanted a peaceful place for birds and wildlife, but somewhere along the way, I realized I was building it for myself too. I can't wait to see what visits this little fountain over the next few weeks. If you enjoyed coming along with me, I'd love to have you join me for the next project. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.